My mind back and forth about what I was going to read, but I think I picked something. There are a few groups of related pieces in my new book, and there's a trilogy of pieces that are about formative LSD experiences.
Yes.
And I want to read one of those, so that's what I'm going to do. This one is called The Motion Trip. When I was a teenager, I spent some time on tour following the Grateful Dead. It was a period of great personal discovery for me, opening up new frontiers in as many directions as I could think of, physically, intellectually, psychically, sexually, and of course, let's not forget about chemically. I was also forming my first real notions of identity, trying to figure out who or what I might be without the supervisory influence of my parents and teachers, without the judgment of my former classmates, and without all the definitions imposed by the society into which I was born. And with this goal in mind, I had put myself adrift on the sea of an endless concert, a boundless parking lot, one eternal wild night, floating and blazing forever onward through the universe with no morning on its horizon. The whole Dead Show carnival was moving all the time to the next forests, the next city, the next altered state. And each of the people along for the ride was moving too, inside and out. Thousands of us were traveling through night after night, trying to somehow discover our individual freedom through this exercise in group consciousness. From the inside, this looked to all of us like an obviously beautiful thing. But from the outside, what we were doing probably wasn't obvious at all. Not only were our clothing and hygiene customs unfamiliar to the common citizen, but we physically moved in ways that would be pretty hard to decode without a certain amount of inside information. For the locals in the places we traveled through, one of the most noticeable things about the Deadhead caravan rolling into town was the downright befuddling spectacle of what we Deadheads thought of as dancing. To the untrained eye, we were nothing but a large, ungainly troop of clumsy, rhythmless white kids engaged in some dazed jam session of totally disorganized corporal noodling. Most people assumed, to some extent correctly, that our movements were simply representative of what it looked like to be on drugs. I'm sure many a sheltering parent pointed us out as a warning to their impressionable youngsters not to get high, lest they wind up twirling and staggering strangely across the countryside, draped in dirty hair and tattered, clashing fabrics. The unusual dancing of the Deadheads came in almost infinite varieties, some of which were quite singular, while others were adopted by whole subgroups. The largest and, dare I say, most organized of these groups were the spinners. They were the ones who would turn in a circle non-stop for the duration of entire concerts. They were usually grouped loosely together in the back where they could find more space. They would congregate in the hallways around arenas or on the grassy hills sloping up from amphitheaters and simply spin around in circles for hours. This ritual, connected to the Sufi whirling tradition, was a structured practice for them, aimed at achieving a religious ecstasy. But it also inspired some spin-off practitioners who incorporated that move and then took the ride in their own customized directions. There were other groups, too, more dispersed and less officially identified, but still sharing a common base step in their dance configurations. Among them were the bouncers, who would essentially jump up and down without lifting their feet from the ground, shaking their heads tightly back and forth in the process. Then there were the skippers, who would skip in place throughout the show, changing speeds with each song, often wiggling their hands high above their heads as if to shout out, "Hallelujah!" And there were the hand dancers, who planted their lower bodies in one motionless position, and then proceeded to illustrate the narrative components in each note and lyric of the songs with a series of intricately detailed interpretive hand and finger gestures. Also scattered through the crowd were those who made an art of dancing with certain props, like glow sticks or hula hoops, and handfuls of people who seemed to be practicing martial arts moves and meditation poses to the music. Then there were the ones we called flamingos, because they would spend the whole show on one foot, focused on making any rhythmic or decorative movements they could manage without ever putting that second foot down. And if at some point during the concert that second foot did touch down, the flamingo would stop instantly and their eyes would go wide, like their whole conception of self had just been interrupted by an emergency announcement from God ringing out over the PA system. I think I was mostly a combination skipper, hand dancer, but I definitely had my flamingo nights now and then. Whatever your particular step was, in all these motions, these twistings and bobbings and jumpings and writhings, there was something monumental taking place. They were all the steps of a profound human inner journey. The Dead shows were a safe haven for people who were not yet fully comfortable moving their bodies in public, people who had lost touch with the intuitive understanding of their own forms, whether through loss of confidence, fear of judgment, or some other trauma of daily life. This was a place where they were encouraged and supported in their effort to shed their inhibitions and escape their self-consciousness. Here, they were granted the freedom by an unconditionally loving peer group to let go of their frightened little egos and surrender to the beauty of the music, the vibes, the communal energy force. In fact, they were encouraged to relinquish conscious control of their bodies altogether and just become one with the rhythms in any way that naturally occurred for them, thus establishing or re-establishing a primal relationship to music and to their physical selves.